Hi, welcome to Integrate or Die. I'm Steve Hunt.
And I'm Jordan Katz.
So this week we spoke with Russ Fadal of Augmentor, and Russ, fascinating technology he's in the world of HR technology, but comes from the area of production technology, which is really interesting conversation. Jordan, what are some of the things that you took away from this discussion?
Well, first of all, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about workers that are out in the field or manufacturing warehouse. Incredibly interesting, totally different paradigm. And one of the things that I found really enlightening was how quickly you can, and how much data there is, how quickly you can gather tons of data and then take very specific actions based on the results. Everything from like an extra turn of a crank to the way you turn on and off a machine has an effect on the employees, the workspace, the performance, the productivity, the safety, et cetera. Really enlightening.
Yeah. I thought the really tactical nature of these jobs and how he talked about actually how in measuring people when you're transparent and use it for the right reasons actually increases employee engagement because it allows better decisions to be made about the employees and the work environment that affects them, which is counterintuitive to a lot of stuff about when we think about employee monitoring, if you will.
Right.
He also shared some very interesting cultural differences around the world about people's attitudes towards monitoring and monitoring technology, and some fascinating things on the impact of why things like Google glasses and smart glasses didn't take off in the manufacturing world that everyone thought they would, and what affects the shift of major hardware technological shifts and its impact on HR technology. So fascinating conversation. Let's give a listen. Russ, welcome to Integrate or Die. Thanks for showing up. We always start these podcasts by telling you why we wanted you on the show. And the reason we wanted you on the show is you work in the world of HR technology, but you come at it from a different perspective. I mean, if from an HR technology perspective, we'd probably put you in the learning area of HR technology, but you're not a learning HR technology guy. You've kind of entered this from a different background. And I think it's really fascinating the sort of production perspective that you bring on that. So my first question is, well, that's how we describe you. How would you describe yourself? How did you end up doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for inviting me on, Stephen and Jordan. I do come at it from a fairly oblique standpoint. My whole life is spent in manufacturing operations and essentially running and monitoring automated equipment. And so when I think of like HR and humans, they all were just an operator with a username and password, but we didn't know who they were, what their skills were, didn't know anything about their experience, even what their role was. All we knew is that someone had to log into some of the software we built. So I started, in the world of factory automation. Started a couple companies that sold and made equipment for manufacturing automation, and then a couple years back, or back in 2000, I started a company that connected factories to SAP, and we were acquired by SAP. A company was called Lighthammer, and then started a company in 2009 called ThingWorx, which was really the first industrial IoT platform. But in that history, all I've really done before this is really help companies and people run automated equipment. And so from an HR standpoint, as I said, I really, we knew nothing about the people. But in 2018, we founded Augmentor, which now offers software and is now called the Connected Frontline Worker Space. And so we built a platform back then to use AI to help individually guide and support workers to optimize their performance while running equipment and doing maintenance and performing inspections. But sort of how I ended up on the HR side of the world, or the learning side, is during the pandemic, it became really clear that manufacturers had a really new problem, which was the workforce problem, where tenure rates dropped from on average 17 to 20 years to 3 years. Time and position. So if I'm running a piece of equipment, used to be they could expect me to be running that piece of equipment for 3 years. Now that's down to 9 months, and maybe 5 to 10 times the amount of turnover. And so you have a really, really rapidly changing workforce, rapidly churning workforce that's much less experienced. So we went out and built a skills component to our product, essentially the training and certification of how operators run equipment safely and correctly. And if you look into this world, the systems that have managed that to date have primarily been Excel, maybe 95% Excel, 1% electronic, another electronic system, and paper. And so it's really kind of a white space. And the way people get trained on these skills is kind of different. There's almost no classroom component to it. Pretty much a person will come in, they'll get onboarded by HR, they'll get all of their compliance training out of the way, they'll get put into the operational area or the factory floor, and they will learn through reading work instructions and standard operating procedures how to safely start up a piece of equipment, how to shut it down, how to change it from running, product A to product B, and how to clear a jam. And then they get evaluated based on the supervisor out there. He or she does a sort of over-the-shoulder OJT assessment, and they get assessed as being able to, perform that task. And so now they can be scheduled to do that work. So that's kind of where we got. So we built, a skills component to help manufacturers track and manage their skills inventory in this group of operators that have typically been managed, in this part of their career out of Excel.
Wow. There's a couple of things you said that are sort of shocking, and the world should know this more, that the average tenures drop in manufacturing jobs from 17 years to 3 years, and from 3 years operating equipment to 9 months. I mean, the level of churn, as you're saying, and the level of skilling and reskilling and certification, just the pace it has to happen is so much more rapid than it was. When you look at that problem where manufacturers are trying to deal with, how do we keep our workforce just so they're able to run the machines we need them to run? Is there a technology that has been tried and true out there that when you go into these companies that you're always amazed people aren't using? So I know we're going to talk about some of the stuff you're building right now, but when we always like to start with what's a technology that we've had for a while and you're still kind of amazed that people aren't using it more widely?
Yeah, well, in the skills area, it really has been, dominated heavily by Excel. And there's lots of companies now coming out with sort of digital skills tracking software for different types of frontline workforces. And so the challenge is a lot of companies aren't looking beyond Excel. And I think there are a lot of solutions out there today that are designed to address this problem specifically. The challenge that manufacturers have is, so if you run a line, and let's say there's, just for discussion's sake, there's 10 pieces of equipment and you have 15 operators, and before each operator could run every piece of equipment, today they can only run a subset. And so what you need to do today is you need to know, of the people who showed up today, who's endorsed to do what of those things we need to do with those 10 pieces of equipment. So essentially the line lead is trying to assemble a team of operators and put them to do the tasks that they're certified to do. And it's in an Excel sheet someplace, it hasn't been updated in 2 weeks. And guess what? 4 new people have shown up. And so there's a real liability in having people being assigned to do work that they haven't been certified to be capable of doing. And so, there is technology through a fair number of companies to make the skills matrix live and sort of up to date. And so I think that's it's surprising that, as you said, it's surprising that everyone hasn't already, placed a bet with one of the 5 or 8 providers in the space.
Yeah, that's what I think somebody was told me that Excel is the enemy to HR technology integration. It's it's almost like it's used everywhere, but it also companies, it's almost like, well, good enough is good enough. And I think we're reaching this point. It's not good enough. It might have been good enough when you had less churn in your workforce, but it's not working when the people that you had last week are not necessarily the people you've got this week, and it's changing constantly. What about the current innovations? When you looked at this, I'm curious how you decided, I hope you didn't wake up one day and say, I looked at my career and what I don't have is enough HR in my life. What is it that inspired you to start this company, to start Augmentur, and say, I can solve this problem? And what are the current innovations you're working on that you're the most excited about? So assume that these companies have gotten off Excel, they've gotten more good skills data. What is it that you're doing that you're like, yeah, this is a problem we can solve? And I'm really curious, because as an operator, how you're looking at it.
Yeah, it's actually kind of serendipitous. When you're an entrepreneur, they say the only thing you cannot control is market timing, right? Everything else is fundamentally in your control. So we started the company in 2018. and it was there was maybe 15 suppliers in the connected worker space, and none of them at the time were doing anything around skills management. And so we entered late in the space, and we said, well, if we're going to enter, we have to have a compelling and enduring competitive advantage, right? And back then we said, okay, what the value, the true opportunity in connected worker is really the data that comes back off frontline workers as they perform their daily activities. And so we were going to make this a data play, and the data that comes back is extremely noisy. 35% or so is on average noise. And so we said, okay, well, we'll use AI to essentially strip out the noise and have it learn to recognize patterns of data that represent actual performance and that represents is not representative of actual performance. So we made that idea. We got this product released in 2019. Turns out no one wanted to buy connected worker software. So we missed the market timing. But so we had this AI. I mean, people were buying it, but it was in the early adopter stage of the market when I thought it was farther. The pandemic changed that, and it changed it. Ultimately, now everyone knows they need to invest in their frontline workforce because they have an onboarding problem and they have a how do I run my equipment with a smaller, less experienced workforce, right? And so what really happened, there's always good fortune if you're successful, is now people they want what we deliver because we now know how every worker performs at every skill in real time, and so they can now close the loop between what I've endorsed this person to do, how I've trained him or her, how well they're actually doing the work. And so with a closed loop, I can actually say, well, this person, we should move this person up a step so they go through a progression, which is great for HR, right? Keeps retention, or perhaps this person has been trained and is endorsed at a level 2, but really isn't working that well, so we need to reskill them. So what I'm excited about is that, because we do the skills training side and the work execution side, and with AI, we can tie them together so how good is all your training material, which one has the best outcomes. So if I have to invest in, pardon me?
No, I was just going to say, cutting through all that noise, what are some of the most interesting things that you've found? Some good examples.
Yeah, so a good example is, we deliver essentially 3 things. One is we can tell you of the work that's being done. So let's say you have 1,000 maintenance procedures that are run across your 40 facilities. Which ones offer the biggest opportunity for improvement? So in terms of reduced time, and whether it's a training problem or is it a process problem. So that's one. So it helps them direct their continuous improvement teams to improve the efficiency of operations. Number 2, we can tell you how proficient every worker is at every task they do. And then you can decide, where do I target my workforce development investments? And you can imagine with a rapidly changing workforce, it's kind of great to know that at an individual, worker level. So you're not making sort of broad brush, well, let's retrain everyone or let's promote someone based on anecdotal evidence. And then you get the problem where, I got promoted because I had beers with my boss, and the person who didn't get promoted, it's like, wow, he only got promoted because he's a drinking buddy, And so getting these
which
real
is a skill, by
insights.
The way. I falter at that skill. The classic one that I've seen so many times in technology is the great salesperson gets promoted to sales manager, and then they're miserable, and all their direct reports are miserable because they're amazing. They have amazing sales talent, amazing sales skills, but maybe no managerial talent or no managerial skills, but with talent, but they're untrained. I feel like that what we're talking about could solve that problem at any moment, but also, as you talk about in the connected workforce, in more, in the field jobs, then the loss can be replaced very quickly.
Well, I think what is interesting, Russ, because we had another learning technology expert named Jenny Dearborn on. It was interesting. We talked about the future of learning technologies. He said we really need better technology that assesses who needs to learn and assesses whether they learned it or not, which is what you're focusing on those sides. Yeah. Can you break down, because this is the mathematical, analytical part of me, is what is the exact data? Like you said, you're able to tell people's proficiency level performing different tests. How does this data come out? I mean, what is it like? Are you videotaping them? I mean, how do you actually know what they're doing?
So primarily, they get a digitized version of a standard operating procedure, a work instruction, inspection list, a lubrication list. How do I change the seal on this pump, right? And so they go there, and before, let's use the seal on a pump example. So that's done by the maintenance technician, not by the operator, because it's complex maintenance. He or she would get a work order printed out from the maintenance system, and they'd walk out in the field with these pieces of paper. It would say, make sure the lockout, tag out the equipment so it doesn't kill you. Take the gamper wrench and turn it 23 times until the torque is this. Replace the seal, button it back up, clean up your workspace. If you had a single question on any of those things, that's all the information you got. Basically said, what do I do? Not how do I do it? And so again, so what they do now with our software, they go out, they'll be in a tablet or through smart glasses or something, and they'll go through that process. They'll say, I'm at the site. First thing they do is they take a picture as found. Okay, this is how I found the piece of equipment. They might write some notes. Then they'll go through that step-by-step procedure. And then when they're done, they'll do it as left, right? And so for the company, they get factual knowledge that this work was done. So in maintenance, there's a thing called pencil whipping, which is when you get assigned maintenance jobs and you run out of time. A lot of times you just go, yeah, I changed the oil, and you never change the oil, right? And so compliance is a big thing. That one thing is compliance. Two is they never know how long jobs took, because there's always a standard time, and when you came back, you'd write down how long to take. You'd write down the standard time, right? And so they couldn't really balance their workload because they had no real data. So when the maintenance tech goes through these things, he or she is stepping through this. And so we take the detailed timing. They went to step 2, they started the video, they paused it, they finished the step, went to step 3. And so that stream of activity data comes back. And one simple reason you need AI is, let's say the tech is pretty smart, it's done this before, gets to step 3, does 4, 5, and 6 from what's in their head, goes back, advances to 7, from 3 to 7, and then finishes it. So now the data on step 3 looks like, boy, it took a long time to do step 3, but then 4, 5, and 6 took seconds. And so you get these anomalies where you can't say either of those are representative performance. So you basically just put that aside. And so our AI algorithms basically get smarter and smarter and smarter at identifying anomalous data. And then we use supervised learning from our customers to help improve the model. And so that's how we get the data in, and that gives us insight into where the productivity opportunities are, because 100 techs do that same job, and maybe that has a lot of variability. And then also for each individual person, based on either a skill, which could be a group of tasks, or by an individual task, we can understand their efficiency at doing that. And again, targeted training and retraining.
Wow. It's interesting as you're talking, and different from the typical HR technology, is that because you come from this plant operations, very tactical world where people are hired to do very specific tactical things, the way you measure performance is so different, Jordan, from how you hear other people. There's no ratings, there's no general evaluations. It's like, no, we need you to do this certain thing in this certain way, and then just really finding a way to help measure it and use technology to really get a good understanding of what are people actually doing physically, because that's very different from how I think you see performance measured in other areas, which frankly wouldn't work in other jobs. It wouldn't necessarily work like in a retail job, because it doesn't follow procedures the same way. I mean, some aspects would, not all of it.
You're right, it wouldn't, but the amount of interactions and the standardization of interactions and the amount of data around it really gives someone who's in employee strategy or HR strategy or worker strategy a lot of levers to pull with potential immediate results, right? Like if the 13, torque wrench turns aren't enough, and the 14th one makes a difference. You make that change, you make the worker has greater success, everything works better, everyone's happier. There's like a lot of downstream effect. It's fairly exciting for someone who's interested in data and connectivity.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other interesting thing, since you were at Qualtrics, so one of the things we're going to come out with later this year is, in that same data set, there's lots of signals of engagement, right? So engagement is, are they slowly getting worse at their job? I mean, they used to take an hour, now it's an hour and 40 minutes. Are they contributing things that are non-required? Are they providing feedback on a procedure? Are they collaborating with fellow coworkers? So we expect to have a sort of a measurement of engagement that is based primarily off data, not necessarily surveys. How are you engaged? It's like,
right.
How is this person behaving? What are their outcomes looking like? So and then hopefully we'll give some tools to help people test things that could improve engagement.
But I would say that combining that information, the actual output, the operational data that you're collecting with perspective and patterns of thoughts and feelings and behaviors data can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah. It's really, you're touching on, when you look at like a lot of HR technology, you can kind of say we do things around the individual that influences their experience and attitudes that leads to their changes in their behavior. But so much of HR technology focuses a lot on the individual and attitudes. There's relatively little that focuses on the actual behavior, because it's very challenging to measure behavior. And I think what you're saying, to the detail orientation that your system has is, it's very impressive. One question I do have is, how do people react to being measured like this, though? I could imagine, who wants to be measured constantly and people kind
Very
of
good
bristling
question.
at it, or is it something that people in these jobs accept and this is just the nature of my work?
Yeah, that's a great question, and obviously it varies by geography. So in Germany, as an example, we have to turn off the individual performance measurement. Now we haven't done this yet, but we're gonna upgrade it so that we can do cohort analysis. So they can say, people have been on the job 6 months or more. After 6 months, here's the things that all of those people should get. They should take this training. You brought up videos before. There's a lot of companies who have used video and AI to watch people do work. And it's like, well, how many of you sold in the United States? None. We sell a lot in Asia, So again, the sensibilities are very different. But to say this, it's, people in manufacturing, people get measured a lot. Manufacturer execution systems, time and motion studies. So it's not that objective. I mean, people don't object significantly to that. And what it's turned out to do, so early on, one of our early customers said, this is going to be very helpful because it'll help me identify the people who I need, I can get rid of bad workers earlier. And it turns out, he told us that after the fact, right? So we didn't sign up for this, but it turned out it had the opposite effect. What it exposed to him is that there were people who ostensibly their production rates were low, but when he looked into the detailed data, they had a challenge with like 1 of 28 steps. And so they go, Joe's the best on that step. Joe trained Jane. Jane Olsen goes from a 50% performer to a 75% performer. So he says it increased the number. We dismissed fewer people. And 2, because we then use that objective performance data to say, here's the top 3 people for the month, never who was below that. And when they had performance, they could say, here's executive day. He said performance reviews were much better. The employees were much happier because the subjectivity was taken out of it. And before, again, it was the whole subjectivity thing. So, it's being used today to help make better decisions on how to enable and support and enable the workers. You can't find workers. And so what you really want to do is make sure that you can help them so they're not frustrated or feel incompetent, or that you can get the people who want and step up, from a step 1 to step 2, so they make more money, they get more responsibility, right? So I think
sense.
with the way the workforce is, it's nothing but a positive tool for the workforce, because the operational teams are going, I can't hire enough people. So how do I help these people be the best they can individually be?
That's, a couple of things. One, I think the cultural differences that you're finding are fascinating. Like in Germany, you can't measure the individual level of videos work in Asia, but they don't work in the United States. That's kind of fascinating insight. But the other thing that you're sharing reminds me of the conversations around performance management, which is, I remember there was a whole big thing years ago to get rid of ratings. We're going to get rid of performance ratings in companies. And a customer shared, one, you have to evaluate people, so you can eliminate ratings, but you can't eliminate evaluation. And sure, being rated is anxiety provoking, but it's more anxiety provoking to know you're being rated and not knowing how it's being done and who's doing it. And so what you're sharing is that the system, I'd asked you a question about it, seems to me a key thing for this employee acceptance is the transparency, that we are measuring you. This is how we're going to look at it. This is how we're going to use it. And so that they understand the purpose of it. And then your example is it's allowing the company to better understand employees and say, hey, if you're not hitting your targets, it's not necessarily you collectively. Maybe it's a certain step, or maybe in some cases, we failed to train you well enough. Or maybe I imagine also sometimes you encounter that actually it's not you, it is the machine. It's something wrong with the machine.
Absolutely.
Too.
Or it's the wrong tool, so everyone struggles in step 7. We have a target time of 8 minutes, but everyone is on average it's 17 minutes, and it affects every worker, right? So if it affects one worker, it's probably a training problem. But if you see a wide dispersion across a broad set of workers, then it's more of a process problem. The interesting thing is that we do, one of the things our customers like is that we use this dynamically. So when someone goes to do a job, we measure, up to 5 things, like, what's their skill rating. So if you're a 4, you're an expert, right? You can train others. What's their proficiency? So what's the actual measured proficiency versus what someone, endorsed them at? When's the last time they've done this task, and how recently have they done it? And so we might say, okay, well, you're junior, you're level 1 on the Harvey ball. You haven't done this in 90 days. You're going to watch a reminder video. So when that person goes to the instructions, what he or she sees is not the same thing the expert sees. The expert would not want to be forced to watch a stupid video, right? He's going to say, or she's going to say, look, I've seen the video. I don't need to see it. I just want a checklist and some additional help if I want it, right? And so we dynamically change the guidance and instruction that people get based on some combination of factors. Could be that a supervisor has to sign off on your work, but not on Jordan's work, right? Because Jordan's senior, and so the guidance and support can change dynamically based on individual worker profiles.
Wow. It's just the power of understanding people's behavior and actions at a more detailed level, both for like how you manage the individuals, but also how you manage the overall work processes. It's fascinating. So the next question is past failures, though. As you're doing this, because you're kind of like really pushing into a new area, aside from not timing the market right, as you said earlier on. But are there things that you've seen as you're moving into this area that just didn't work, we thought it would work, or how somebody used it that you're like, well, there's something we shouldn't be doing, or I don't want to do again?
Yeah. Well, when I thought about this question, I basically was thinking, well, the manufacturing space itself is they make these mistakes because they're very risk adverse and cautious. And so they work off of paper instructions and paper SOPs and paper training well past the time when, those tools have no longer served the current market. But an interesting failure was the way we got into the market is my 2 co-founders who worked at my prior company said, hey, we're doing some work with smart glasses. So we want to do a joint venture with a smart glass company who makes industrial smart glasses, and they were going to do the software side. And they said, do you mind just helping me out on the contract negotiations? And so back then, the market research said, this is in 2017, that there were going to be 5 million sets of industrial smart glasses in the enterprise by 2019 or 20. And so anyway, so we went in and, it turned out that they couldn't come to agreement. I got interested in the space. We did our analysis, came up with this, AI data-driven approach, and started the company. And we built. We support iOS and Android, but we also supported Google Glass, a company called RealWear, a company called Vuzix, right? So 2 industrial smart glass makers and 1, Google Glass. And it turns out that market, it's 1/50th to 1/100th of what it was projected to be. The adoption of of smart glasses in the enterprise is, it's like one of the biggest misses I've seen, forever.
It's kind of like all the discussion about the metaverse and stuff. Sometimes we all think these technologies are going to transform, or what are the Jordan, what are the tokens that we had? That you could the NFTs. Remember that was?
Oh yeah.
Wait, did you just say the tokens that we have? I don't have any NFTs. I don't want.
I have one.
SAP
SAP gave me an NFT. It's
worth. That's actually very nice.
I think it's worth negative now. I think it's.
Oh, you have to pay to keep your rights.
No, but maybe I'll come back. I wonder though, Russ, on that point, that going back to the timing because I think just Facebook just came out with a new version of smart glasses.
Sure.
Do you think the failure was because the smart glasses don't work at the time, or the market's not ready? Do you actually think they will start getting used, or
I think we're because we built at ThingWorx when we got acquired, we built after the acquisition, we built a really beautiful AR system for industrial use for equipment OEMs, and it ran on HoloLens, and you could also do it through tablets. I'd say we're like 3 to 5 years away. The glasses, I just did the Vision Pro. I did a demo on that. I've done the Facebook stuff. There's a couple things. It's a big enough problem. You have to learn to get used to it. Number one, that the only use cases that they sell for are ones that are really, really require hands-free operation. And the primary use case right now with smart glasses in the industrial market is it's not for guidance and instruction. It's for sort of like a remote expert call. So you may be a lineman on a power line, and you got both your hands, and you want to go, hey, call the expert. Hey, John, take a look at that transformer. Tell me what you think, right? I'll give you a real world example about why this is hard. So, I own this manufacturing company with a partner, and they use Augmenteer software, of course. If you can't eat your own dog food, right? That's the big thing. So I go, okay, it's running. And so I go, why don't we have you guys try? Because they're doing assembly. So it'd be great if they had 2 hands free, right? So we got Google Glass in there, and it was in a small area of the company. And there's 5 technicians assembling these sort of OEM grade workstations. And so I get feedback as well. The first guy puts it on, he goes, well, I'm blind in that eye. So, and Google Glass is not flippable. So he can't use it because he's blind. The next guy, who's maybe 50 years old, and he wears readers, and the glass is out of focus to him, and it also reflects in his readers. So it's bugging him. All right, that's two of 5, can't use it yet. The third was the youngest guy. I go, he's gonna love it. Feedback, I wear it for 20 minutes, I get a migraine headache, so I have to go lay in the break room for an hour. So 3 of the 5 people who tried it couldn't do it for reasons sort of unrelated to our software. And so it is a big lift to learn how to use these things. And then the ones like Oculus and Vision Pro and HoloLens, the idea of having something that's between you and like the physical world when you're actually in a facility, there is way too much safety dangers, So it's going to be a while. I think once you put them on like normal glasses and they're not heavy, you can wear them for a shift. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for that. But right now it's definitely one of the biggest misses. And a couple of companies in our space, they went all in. They were exclusively for smart glasses, and then they had to sort of pivot.
Wow, I think one of that's fascinating sort of intake on just sort of this one particular technology. But as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking maybe when it comes to these really like major next step technology. It's almost needs to become ubiquitous in society before we're going to allow them to use it at work. I mean, you would put the smartphone in that way. Companies, smartphones largely, by the time they got widely used in companies, they were already widely used outside of work. I think if you tried to
100%
drop
agreed.
smartphones into a company ahead of broader society, it probably wouldn't have worked.
Mm.
So I kind of think that the glasses may be the same thing. Although, as you pointed out, there are some problems that you can't solve with technology. So next question is, and this, I'm really curious to get your thoughts, is as you're now in the field of HR technology from production technology, and you're having to integrate with a lot of other HR technology systems and stuff like that, what are the features or solutions you wish someone else would build? Say, we're never going to build this, but I wish if somebody else would build this, it would make our tools a lot more effective and our job a lot more easier. What would you like to see someone else build?
Yeah, I think it would be, there's one crazy interesting use for Gen AI. If you look at, I always forget the names of the individual, like Solora, the video image generator. I mean, one of the toughest things if you want to train people on stuff or build visual work instructions is that you have to actually, create the procedures, digitize it. You have to create the storyboard. You have to take videos. I think it'd be great. It'd be interesting to see someone build a Gen AI based thing that would help people go out and, basically say, I want to convert the instructions from paper to this. I'm going to add videos. I'm going to add, sort of mock-ups and then use Gen AI where someone could go out, the senior person. Okay, the way you start up, this winder, right, and have something that's to generate the content, in a smart way where you basically talk through it and then you correct it. Well, on step 3, you need to do that. I think that would be great on the operations side. But on the, now that we're getting into learning and stuff, one of the, first barriers is, well, how do we create rich we need to create all this rich content, right? Right now we, it might be paper-based or something like that, or it's PowerPoint, but we want to get videos in there. And so I think it could solve it could help with the learning side of what we do.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good example, because I've seen something like that will take like manuals and convert them into text-based sort of instant messaging. There's a cool technology, but that idea of like filming an expert doing it, then converting it using generative AI into like segmented training with like virtual reality, if that made sense. That's a great idea out there. Audience, go make it happen.
And contact us. We'd love to partner with you.
Exactly. I always like to say that, Russ, ideas are cheap. It's the execution that's expensive.
That's right.
Thank you for sharing that one. Two last questions. One on the career guidance, and I think you've maybe as you're working with people in the HR technology field, and you do come at this from the production side, and I like how you started. HR basically just was an employee ID number and a name that had to log in your system. As you're looking at this field advancing, what career guidance, and maybe would you say to people working in HR technology, say, look, if you want to make technology that's really going to improve the manufacturing world and the manufacturing employee experience in those workforces, what guidance would you give to a person, regardless of where they're coming from, that like, this is what you should do, based on,
Yeah, I think on a general sense, my career guidance would be, come into manufacturing someplace because we need you. We need with the Chips Act and the reshoring. It's sort of a golden era in manufacturing in the U.S. and we're already down. We have fewer factory workers than we need, and parents, 80% manufacturing parents who work in manufacturing don't want their kids to go into manufacturing, and so we have this growing shortage. So I just would say it's a better field today than it was 10 years ago, because now they're saying, hey, how can I make my employees' life better? How can I make it a place where they want to come to work? So that's one thing. Two, I think the perfect world, I think we need to be investing in sort of this closed loop, from onboard and from hire to retire, a data-driven series of capabilities where we can we always have a a real-time understanding of where people are in their certifications and their skills endorsements, but also how they're performing, what our projected quality of life is for that person, right? Because ultimately, we need to think about. I'll use this example about a year ago. It's like, when you go to a website today, when you load a website and you click on an article, some engine back there in the ether has considered like 21 things about me before serving up an ad for like, shampoo, right? And when we think about, our operational workers in facilities, we've historically treated them all exactly the same except based on their level, right? And we had no individualized data about anything about them. And so I think we really need to be thinking that we need to know as much about, we know a lot more about office workers, by the way, right? But we need to know individually about each person out there, because we need to be able to serve them in the best way possible. Make sure if they're outperforming that they're progressing in their career, right? So they're not like, hey, how about me, right? So I think creating this closed loop thing where you have a 360-degree view of operational workers would be a great foundation to then be able to start adding value, to those roles in companies, and then increasing, engagement, reducing churn, making they're happier about the work they do, prouder about the work they do.
Yeah, I think, your point too about understanding the workforce a lot better, that the manufacturing workforce that's changing, the jobs are changing. But historically, you're right. It was sort of treated that like we treat all operators like they're exactly the same, but they're not. And I think we've been quicker to realize that on the professional, salaried workforce than the hourly workforce. There are probably, there's union regulations and stuff that kind of push you to think that way too. But to your point, I think we need to start really pushing back on that. And then if, people really, I always think too that spend time out with the employees you're trying to work with.
Sure.
I spent time. I'll tell you, in my own life, I remember working for Starbucks, and when you came into Starbucks, you had to work as a barista, no matter what level you came in. And boy, I think every company should do that. It's just, if you have a large workforce, if it's feasible, make sure people spend time out with that workforce. Last question, our wild card question, which is, what is something we should be asking about the future of HR technology and work technology in general that maybe we haven't asked you? And we're also the caveat is you've got to answer the question.
I struggle a little bit with this question, but I do think right now that the the amount of investment in HR technology, the dollars that are invested, I would say it would be great to point some of that investment to this workforce, which generally sits outside of most of the HR systems. Like, as an example, in most of our customers, a big percentage of the workforce don't have email addresses. So they're not in Cornerstone, on demand, because you need an email address. But because, what we're trying to do in the skills area and some of the other stuff we're doing, which is around the operational, but I think there's a whole set of services that can be taken from, the office, salaried worker world, from, the vendors in that world, success factors, people such as that, and could be wrapped around, this, group of people that don't get seen as much by, as in the same way as the rest of the, the company's workers do or employees do. So
yeah, I totally agree, and it's it's more that the portion of the workforce you're talking about is like about, depending on measure, like 55-60% of the workforce. It's the biggest portion of the workforce.
Sure,
and
the desolate worker. Yep,
it is. Look, I guess the question too is, why don't we spend more money? And part of it, I guess, is also, and you've mentioned to it, that often in the people managing these workforces, they're still on paper, they're still on Excel. Why are companies not spending more money? I guess my last question, if you have a thought on that, why is it you think manufacturing plant operators are content to stay with the status quo of what is very outdated technology? Do you think there's anything we could do that would help change their thinking?
I tell you what I do think is that the workforce is requiring them to take a deep look at themselves. What can we do to, particularly, not only do you have this churn, the jobs aren't considered that exciting, and the younger people are coming in, they're like, I have to go over to that kiosk, can't I just do the work on my phone or on a tablet or something? And so a lot of the, at the corporate level, a lot of our bigger customers, that's what they're talking to us about. We have to make it a place where, we have younger workers coming in and, going with a clipboard that, it makes the job seem really out of date. And so I think there is, sort of self-reflection right now going on, because they need to find better ways to, attract and retain their workers. And so now, they're thinking, well, how can we make this more like a consumer experience? Right.
Yeah. I think it's like, the job should be at least good enough that the people performing it wouldn't mind having their kids do it.
That's
for sure
a real test, isn't it?
Maybe the bar. Well, hey, Russ, I want to thank you so much for appearing on Integrated Die. Jordan, do you have any last questions before we sign off?
No, thank you. This is incredibly interesting. I love taking a different view of HR tech and the work you do. Certainly, we've talked more about wrenching and turning things than we ever have on this show, and I just appreciate it. It's a really great perspective.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Steve. Thanks for the invite. Really exciting to talk to you guys, and also to get your guys' perspective, coming from the HR side of the world, and Jordan.
We're all about integrating here, Russ. All about integrating.
Or die.
Or die.